Hey guys, welcome back. So as you may be able to tell, it's absolutely bitter cold and winter has finally set in now. So I thought we'd just take a minute while we're out on the bank to have a look at my top 3 rigs for winter carp fishing. So number 1, this is a rig that I use a lot, especially late autumn, early winter. So this is a rig that you guys have all seen by now many times over, and that is my favorite slip D multi-rig. I'm not sure how much that's going to pick up on the camera. So this rig is tied with about 6 inches of the Kaplan tank braid. This stuff is absolutely hard as nails. It's uncoated, but it's got a certain stiffness to it. So it follows the contours of the lake bed really well and presents really nicely over lots of different debris on the bottom. And this time of year, you tend to get a lot of leaf debris, chod build up in the lake. So it's nice to have a rig that's going to present perfectly over the top of everything else and follow the contours of the lake. So one of the great things about this rig is that when you hook a fish, all of the weight exerted by the fish is pulling the hook, and you'll pull in the braid, so everything does bunch up. You'll find that the kicker will pull off of the hook and the hook will be literally just looped on. So it's really strong. And also a great thing about that is that you know when you've been done, because on the cast, it will all land out perfectly. What I tend to do is use a little PVA bag with my rig. What I'll do in the beginning is pull back the kicker, take the loop off the hook, push the loop through a PVA bag, and then put it back on the hook. So the PVA bag is hanging on the slip D and not on the hook. So when you cast out, essentially that PVA bag is tied to your rig and not to the hook. So it goes out perfectly. So every single time you bring the rig back in, if you've not had a fish, you'll notice that the hook is in perfect position still. As where sometimes if you make a big cast with no PVA bag on or nothing to sort of hold the hair in place, it can sort of slide back a little bit. So you'll find that it will bunch up a little bit. But using a PVA bag on the slip D, it casts perfectly every time, which means that when you get done by a fish and it's pulled to the other end, you'll be able to see. So it's like using a blowback rig on a hair rig and using a bit of silicone to trap it. You'll see when it's been pushed back. You know when the fish are sort of feeding or in the area, or if you've been done by the fish, in which case you can sort of change over and adapt to that situation. So that's a really key feature about this rig. And yeah, this is an absolute deadly rig. I find any of the D rigs just hooks the fish really well. It's so aggressive, it flips over really quickly with a semi-buoyant bait. And you can use this with a pop-up as well. You just use a tiny bit of extra putty and that just weighs it down. So that's a rig that presents really well. And yeah, that's gonna be definitely in my armory every single winter trip. Let's put that down. So following on from that rig, essentially, this is a very similar rig, just presented in a totally different way. So again, we've gone in with the slip D multi-rig, but this time round, it's only around 4 inches long. And that is attached, as you can see there, to an inline lead. And that's because that's gonna be sat inside a solid bag. So that is my number 1 rig for a solid bag. So I'll pop that all perfectly inside the bag and it's gonna sit perfectly presented just like that, either with a wafter hook bait or with a small pop-up, just weighted down just below, like I said, with the hinge section of that multi-rig / slip D rig. And yeah, this is an absolutely deadly rig because you can cast this almost anywhere. When it's perfectly presented inside that solid bag, either with pellets, or you can use maggots, you can use sort of natural baits, you can use boilie crumb. It's really versatile. So you can really pick and choose what kind of baits you want to put inside, depending on the season, depending on the type of lake that you're fishing on. But if you're fishing a lake that doesn't have any nuisance species, or doesn't have many at all, a natural approach like maggots and worms can be really good inside that solid bag. So I'll tend to use a PVA bag full of maggots and crumb, and then as the hook bait, I'll use a small pop-up, probably around 12 mil, and then just top it with 3 or 4 maggots on top of that. And that can be an absolute deadly approach. As I previously mentioned, you can cast these almost anywhere. The only place that I don't really fish solid bags is in heavy silt. So if you've got deep silt or really soft silt on a lake, they tend to sit down too low in amongst all that silt. I mean, no doubt if you really pursue it, you really could catch some fish like that, but I just don't feel that it's presented perfectly for the style of rig that it is. So I'll always fish these as a drop-off system. So with the small leaders that I tie up, just going around the outside of the inline lead. And I tend to use a fairly heavy lead with them. As always, it's usually around 3 to 3.5 ounces, sometimes even more depending on where I'm fishing. But you can cast these to overhanging trees and just punch it through the branches. Yeah, you can really do lots and lots of things with a solid bag. Another great thing about the solid bags is that you can really start to roam your rigs around. You're not spreading too much bait each time, it's just one mouthful of bait. So if you're going to cast out to a shoal and fish, you can put a solid bag on it and you're not worried too much about, you know, destroying a swim or spreading bait too far around a swim. So that's an absolute brilliant rig. And last but not least at all, this is probably my favourite winter rig, and in fact I've got one on right now, and that is the Hinge stiff rig. So this is a rig that's probably accounted for more than any winter fish for me. This rig is an obscene rig. This rig is such a good carp catcher, especially the slightly bigger fish. I'm not sure why, maybe it's just because it's presented a little bit higher than the other rigs on the market, but these rigs really do tend to pick off the bigger fish. It used to be known as a big fish rig, and I still consider it one of those, really. If you can count for any rig being a big fish rig, then this is going to be one of them. So I like to fish my Hinge stiff rigs with the boom section to be very supple. Again, this is the same braid that I tie my other rigs with. It's the tank braid. Again, it's very supple, but also it's got a certain stiffness to it that will kick that rig away, but it's going to follow the contours and lay over everything. And in the stiff section, that is a 25-pound rigidity, and that's fairly long actually. So in the winter months, I tend to fish the Hinge stiff rigs a bit higher than I would sort of throughout the year. And that's for one reason, is because I'm roaming this rig around and there's no freebies around it at all. So this rig's gonna get cast out, and I'm hoping the fish will be able to see that from quite far away. So I want it to be quite proud and quite visual on the lake bed. I'll go for a very bright hook bait. So I do tend to go for the really bright colours, the whites, the yellows, the fluoro pinks, just because I like a really sort of visual hook bait when I'm fishing these. All of your attraction is in the smell and the sight. So I'll cast them out and I'll sort of fan my rigs around and I'll roam them around the swim and move them probably every 2 hours, something like that. So maybe in between that, if I feel like I need to cast again, or if I feel like I'm seeing fish show somewhere else, I wouldn't think twice about reeling that rig in and putting it out somewhere else. So yeah, this is an absolutely brilliant rig. As you'll notice, I'll tie all of my rigs using an anti-tangle sleeve just to help kick it away. I tend to use putty or just the little sinkers on the actual boom sections of the rigs. And then I always go for a very strong, very big hook. So I tend to use like size 4 as a minimum. Sometimes occasionally I'll go for a size 6, but it tends to be a size 4 throughout all of my rigs nowadays. I like a big hook, and I like the way that they hold on properly. So when you get a hook hold of the fish, it sets inside the mouth, and you haven't got to worry about pulling out a tiny little hook in a tiny little bit of skin on the fish, and also damaging the fish too much, because once the hook goes in once with the micro barb, it stays in. Play the fish in, pop it out, bit of carp care, and it's done. So you're not damaging a fish by splitting their lips, sawing it back and forth with the barbless hooks. I really do believe in the micro barbed patterns of hooks, because I do think that they are safer for the fish. Well, there we go, guys. That's my top 3 winter rigs for carp fishing. Make sure you get out, have a go, try them all out, see how you get on, and if you give them a go, let me know how you get on with them. And that's my top 3 winter rigs. Cheers for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.